Looking at this second image on my timeline, this is more or less properly exposed, more or less properly white balanced. So looking over here at my scopes at the parade, I can see that it's more or less properly done. The video should not go all the way down to 0. It should not reach all the way up to 1023. And it should be spread out across the middle. So looking at this, I can see that it is to some degree spread out across the middle. Nothing's really going off the top, nothing's going down under the bottom. The other thing I would expect to see is, unless there's a reason for a scene to have a strong color cast, I should have about as much red as I do green as I do blue. Now, looking at the scopes, I see that's not quite the case. I'm a little bit deficient in the blue department. I could also probably stand to expand some of this stuff in the middle. So just real quick, let's go through and play with some wheels to see what happens, all right? So again, I'm going to start here with the lift. Now, I can do two things here. There's a control wheel underneath that will allow me to increase or decrease the lift, and then there's color that I can apply. Again, lift generally applies to the darks. So my expectation as I start to turn this wheel one way or the other is that I will see the bottom end of these graphs changing, and we'll see a change in the image up here, certainly. So I'm just going to click on this wheel and start dragging to the right, and you'll see what happens as I really push this is I'm really lifting all of my darks. I'm making all of the darks brighter. Now, there's some corresponding change to the midtones, and there's a little bit of change to the top, but not really that much. Likewise, if I go the opposite direction, I'm really pulling everything down into the blacks. And maybe this is a special effect I want, but this certainly doesn't look particularly good. Now I can reset these a couple of ways. Each control has got an individual reset button, right? So since all I've done is change the lift, I could reset the lift. Or there's a master reset here that'll reset everything that I've done to the primary wheel. I can also bypass this by turning the effects on and off, and that's right up here above the viewer. There's a little, it looks like a rainbow and stars icon. So this was before, this is after. I can do the same thing here by clicking on the node itself, turn the node on and off to do a comparison. So let me reset that one. So we see what lift did. So gamma, when I start playing with the gamma, my prediction is that everything in the middle of this graph is going to move up or down. And the highlights and the shadows will also be affected, but to a lesser degree. So here we go. I'm going to click and drag to the right. All right, so you can see it's shifting that whole thing up, but it's not deforming the waveform nearly as much as it did when I used the lift control. Now as I'm getting down, you're seeing it starting to crush against the bottom. All right, I'm going to reset that. Gain should do the same thing, but mainly for the highlights. So again, my prediction is that I'm going to see more change in the top end of these graphs than I am anywhere else as I click and drag this. So I'm going to pull to the right. And notice everything just flattens against the top there. No, my blacks haven't moved. They're still down there where they were before, but I'm stretching the heck out of this thing, turning more and more things into highlights. And if we go the other direction, right, I'm squishing it down. I can almost make this look as bad as this previously underexposed shot here. So let me reset the gain. And then the offset applies to the entire image. So basically this is a way to make the entire image brighter or darker. So what should happen as I play with this is that these entire graphs shift up and shift down. All right, so if I drag to the right, they're not changing in shape. Nothing's elongating or compressing. They're simply moving in unison. And likewise, if I go the other direction. Reset. If you have a mouse with a scroll wheel, that helps a lot. I do not. I'm working with a trackball, so I have to do the whole click and drag thing. Across the bottom here, contrast. So again, I'm just going to click and drag to the right and then to the left, and you can watch what happens. It's basically going to compress or expand these waveforms. Right? So as I drag to the right, as I increase my contrast, it's expanding these waveforms, pushing them outwards. And if I go to the left, It's compressing them, bringing them in towards the center. These guys I can reset by double-clicking on the name, so I'll double-click on contrast. Pivot doesn't do much of anything at the moment because it's related to contrast, but if I make some changes to the contrast, then I come back in here and do my pivot, you can see it's affecting where the contrast is applied. So I'll reset that, reset that. Saturation dials in and out the amount of color that I have, and you can see that it's a little bit counterintuitive how it's working on the waveform monitor. As I'm pushing the saturation up, the difference between the channels is becoming more pronounced, and as I pull it down towards black and white, they unify quite nicely. Reset that. Hue is a way to shift all of the colors simultaneously, so this could be a way that I could fix a small white balance problem, or this could be a way I could apply a science fiction special effect, right? I'm in a parallel dimension with all the colors are skewed. Luminance mix, you're not seeing really any change right now because I haven't done any manipulation. If I do manipulations based on brightness, now if you look over there at the waveform monitors I'm playing with this, you can see that it's making a little bit of difference. It's a subtle difference in the highlights there. So many of these are interrelated, and adjusting one means you're going to have to go back and readjust another. That's just the way this works. Moving on to the second page of controls here at the bottom. Temperature. Now this is one of my favorites. This is designed to do exactly what I'll need to do in this second shot. This allows me to change to some degree the color temperature of the footage. Now clearly this was not properly white balanced. So by playing with the temperature fader, if I were to bring the color temperature, I'm going the wrong direction. And you can see the effect it's having on the waveform monitors there on the parade. So just without even looking at the picture, just looking at the parade, I can move this back and forth and get pretty close to equal distribution on my red, green, blue. I might need to do a little more tweaking, but that definitely looks better now than it did before. All right. Reset that. This is a very useful tool, and if you have just a little bit of a color balance problem, this is an easy way to fix it. Let me go back to the properly calibrated shot here. Tint. Well, you can see what that does again looking at the monitors. It changes the relative proportions of each of the colors there. This is a subtle. MD, this is mid-range detail, and it's going to be hard to see. You know what, let me make my viewer just a bit on the bigger side here so we get a better view of it. Mid-range detail basically is contrast, but it only is applied to the midtones. And the theory is that by increasing the contrast in the midtones, it makes things easier to see, it makes details easier to see. So I'm going to zoom in this image. I'm holding down Command and hitting plus. We're going to take a look at maybe the foliage here. Okay, it's not exactly crisp, but watch what happens as I play with this mid-range detail, right? As I run it up, it gets contrastier, it gets more contrasty. I don't think contrastier is a word. And it makes it look as if it's a little sharper. If I run that mid-range detail down, I take contrast away from that. That is definitely more blurry, right? Before, after. Right now it's definitely softer. And if I yank that up as far as I can push it, before, after. This is like having an eyeglass exam, right? Which is sharper, number one, number two. So that can help a little bit with sharpness. Let's zoom this guy back out. Color boost. You can see on the waveforms in part what that's doing. This is a little bit different than saturation, although it can achieve similar goals. And then I can independently work with my shadows and highlights. This is not unlike what I was doing with the lift and the gain. Um, so again, there's some overlap here in these guys. So I've got a bunch of things that I can play with. Now I can duplicate a lot of this over here on the graphs. Let me reset everything. On the curves, rather, over here on the curves. The line that you see here represents the relationship between how bright an image is being displayed and how bright it was recorded. So down here in the bottom left-hand corner, what was recorded as a black is being played back as a black. What was recorded as a white in the top right-hand corner is being played back as a white. And it's a linear path in between. If something was 50% bright when it was exposed, it'll be played back as 50% bright. And right now I'm looking at my brightness, which is Y, as well as my red, my green, my blue. I can actually look at any one of these by itself. So this is just brightness. I'm looking at the graph of my black and white image. And this is the red channel. This is the green channel. This is the blue channel. Or I can yank them all together by clicking on that chain there. Now, I can do some manipulation here. So if I grab the white point, I can actually change how it is represented. So notice that as I'm moving it, now what I'm doing is setting it so that something that was recorded at less than 100% is being played back at 100%. Or I can go down this side of the axis. Something that was recorded at 100% is now being played as something less than 100%. So you see this has the effect of bringing the highlights down. This is very much like working with the gain fader over there. Reset that. The black does the same thing. By moving it this way, things that used to not be black are becoming black. And by moving it this way, things that were black are becoming brighter. So this works the same way as the lift control would work. And just by playing with these, I can manipulate my contrast. But what I can do here that is just wicked fun is I can actually add points to this graph and manipulate it. So if I just click here towards the bottom here, I can see that there's a lot of information in this lower half, and maybe I just want to manipulate that a little bit. So if I click, I can put a dot there. This is much like keyframing your audio was. I can move that dot and change the curve of how the contrast is. So what I'm doing here is I'm pushing the low end and the midtones up, but I'm not doing much to the high end, right? Or I can pull them down a little bit. And I can put more than one dot on here. Right, so I can actually do a thing where I'm flattening the contrast of the highlights and increasing the contrast of the shadows and coming up with this weird lithograph looking thing. This is a ridiculous adjustment here, but just to show you some of the power here. And I can do this separately, right? So I can do it just for the red, for example. So I want my shadows to look a little extra special red, but I want the highlights to look a little bit less. And by making it less, I'm actually pushing the opposite here. So if you look at the color wheel, the opposite from red is cyan. It's this blue-green color. So my highlights are going to have a little bit of a cool flavor to them, whereas my shadows are going to have a little bit of a warm flavor to them. And let's go back and forth. This is before, this is after. Before, after. Let me just push that to ridiculous so we can really see. All right, again, original, modified, original, modified. And I could also do this independently on the green axis. So where I'm pumping red, I'm going to pull green. And where I'm pulling red, I'm going to pump green. All right, so these guys are working independently and at cross purposes now. All right, now we're looking like a cheap LCD monitor from the 1990s. We have created something bizarre and undesirable here. I'm going to reset that. Okay, this is what these tools can do. Um, it's a really wide open field when you start playing around with this stuff. It's like, well, what will this do? What will this do? What will this do? And eventually you'll start to develop a sense of how to use them productively. Um, but let's go ahead and move to the next video, and I will show you these things at work in a non silly method.